Yes? Oh. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Are we all here? Good evening. This is the Village of Lake Bluff Historic Preservation Commission regular meeting for December 11th, 2019. We have a rather limited agenda this evening, but we'll start with the roll call.
Certainly, Member Bergman.
Here.
Member George.
Here.
Member Nickel.
Here.
Member Richardson.
Here.
Member Weebolt is absent. Chair Kraus.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Second item is the consideration of the November 13, 2019 regular meeting minutes. These minutes were distributed on Friday in our packet. I would entertain a motion to approve.
I have a
You have
correction.
a correction, okay.
On page 4, under subcommittees, Lake Bluff Online, line
Yeah.
2, it says that Member George reported that she and Member Richardson had been communicating with Chair Kraus. It was actually Member Nickel.
Okay.
I would like to take credit, but I did not do it.
Thank you. Anything else?
That was the only one I saw.
Entertain a motion to approve with that one change.
I'll make the motion.
Second?
I'll second.
We have a motion in 2 seconds. I'll let you decide which one to put in the minutes.
I'm going to give it to Nickel.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Third item is an opportunity for anyone in the audience who would like to address the commission on any item that is within our purview and is not on tonight's agenda. Does anyone would like to address the commission? That's on the agenda. We'll do that next. Thank you. Anyone else would like to, any non-agenda items? Okay, let's get right then to the one item on our agenda tonight. An initial advisory review for demolition of the Stonebridge Estate, which I always think of still as 136 Green Bay Road. The village has received a request for a significant request regarding this landmarked structure, and it's more than a structure. It's structures, landscape, and others. But that request has triggered this meeting. And Glenn, why don't you give us just a quick background and want to go through a couple of slides so we get a better understanding of the process, what we're doing tonight, and what we're going to be doing next month.
Certainly. So I'm happy to introduce this. This is something that does not happen with a great deal of frequency, so always happy to give a refresher and to make sure everyone knows what's going on here at the Historic Preservation Commission. So this application was received in its final form just last Friday. That's why there's not an abundance of background presented to you in the packet. Certainly we would bring that at a future meeting if that background is desired. But to some extent, this is a relatively straightforward discussion we will have at the HPC. This is a very straightforward decision to make tonight, so which is about the application. So as a bit of a review, right, your role overall is to promote preservation. Your role tonight specifically is to evaluate if this particular proposal is consistent with historic preservation in the village, and then if you determine that it is not, you would set a date for a future discussion. Often you may consider starting that discussion at the same meeting. In this case, because of the timing, we recommend you set that, and because of the public interest we expect, we recommend you set that at a date, a special meeting in January. So, of course, not always good to clarify for people, not your role as the Historic Preservation Commission necessarily. Would be a few things. One would be regulating the demolition, right? The HPC does not issue a demolition permit. The building commissioner does. This is not the place. We're happy to hear if there are specific concerns as staff, if there are concerns about fencing or tree protection or things like that, but really not within the HPC's purview to review. Similarly, in this particular case, there's new residential development proposed around this site. In the past, the applicant has voluntarily come forward and discussed that with the HPC, but again, not really within your purview, especially tonight. And then finally, of course, maybe not our role to evaluate applications not yet made, to speculate about what's coming there. Unfortunately, as much as I would like to know, we don't know. So this particular process advisory review it works like this. So as soon as the application is received, a clock starts that ticks for 120 days. 150 days of the village board extends that review period. That's part of the reason we're bringing this to you tonight, is that even though we've only had it in our hands for a few days, the clock's already running. And so it is hard to say that this group should not have a chance to discuss this, that the public should not have a chance to discuss this, even though it's only been in our hands for a few days. I would note that, in fairness to the applicant, this probably wasn't intentional on their part. As you'll see in the packet, this has been a couple-month process of putting these materials together. It's just how the timing worked, and of course, they wanted to complete their materials as soon as they could. So tonight, note the arrow, you are here. This is your initial review. The clock's ticking, but at this meeting, you would decide if this work is consistent or inconsistent with the purpose and goals of the Historic Preservation Ordinance that's in your packet. If it's not, you would request a conference with the applicant to resolve those concerns. You would share specific concerns, you would share your recommendations. And then what would happen after that, where we hope to be, if this is found to be inconsistent tonight, we would suggest you schedule that conference in January. You would reach a mutually satisfactory resolution of those concerns. The applicant has to attend at least once. And then at that point, you may continue meeting. The applicant doesn't necessarily have to participate, unfortunately. And that would go until that total delay clock has elapsed. So 120 days, or if the village board were to grant an extension, 150 days. So that's the process.
So let me interrupt you there for a second. And just for the audience and for anyone watching, or really for the record, I think it's important for us right at this point in our discussion to understand what historic preservation guidelines are within the village. And let me start with a story. Before there was a historic preservation ordinance, and those of us in the village remember that, I remember walking to the train in the morning past houses that I've seen all my years that I've lived here, and walking home at night and seeing a hole in the ground. And there was, and that's what routinely was happening. There was no process for public comment. There was no notice. There was no notification requirement for neighbors. If an appropriate demolition request was received by the village, their rules were that you processed it and issued a demolition permit. So what the Historic Preservation Ordinance did with the village board, actually the Plan Commission and the village board, worked to create this commission and worked to create a set of rules. And those rules include a process for landmarking structures, which we're always happy to do, but it also includes the other side of the coin, and that is a process for looking at proposed demolition. Which is where we are today, demolition or significant change within the structure. So the powers that the ordinance grants to the Historic Preservation Commission and ultimately to itself through the village board is what's called a demolition delay. So there is a maximum 120-day demolition delay that is built into the ordinance, and as Glenn said, that can be extended for up to 30 more days by the village board. The intent of the ordinance is to provide a process where a property owner who wishes to demolish or significantly alter a structure within the village, where there is an opportunity for dialogue, where there is an opportunity for that developer to present their case to this commission, and an opportunity, very importantly, for village residents to express their opinion on what the appropriate use of that particular property is. So that's where we are now. This advisory review process, which I assume that we will approve and begin at some point in January, is to have that dialogue, understand the reason for the demolition request, explore any alternatives or options if there may be any, understand why the developer or the property owner is engaging in this particular activity versus others. But the extent of the power that we have as a commission and the extent of the authority that the village board has is limited to delay, is limited to 120 days here, an additional 30 days at the village board. The village board, when the ordinance was originally enacted, decided that that was sufficient to provide public input to a proposed demolition. So demolition delay, max 150 days, is what the ordinance allows and provides. So that's just background to give you a sense of where we are, give you a sense of the process that will continue. So early March would be the expiration, right, of 120 days, and early April would be the expiration of the 150 if it is extended. So that's just a little bit of background for folks as to where we are in the process that we'll be following. Okay.
Would it be early April?
December to January, January, February, February to March.
Guess I can't count.
One of us can't. It's spring. It's early spring.
Sorry.
Okay, you want to go back? Certainly, and before we continue, I guess 2 more notes I would add. One is this commission is evaluating changes to the preservation ordinance. Some of those include changes to these delayed timelines, so stay tuned for that. Of course, that is not prepared for this particular application. The second is part of these consistent with purpose and goals. Part of everything that's considered here is a list of something like 20 different criteria. If it helps your conversation tonight, it is optional, but we've given you what we think are the most relevant ones here at the dais. So out of that list of 20 or so, there's 7, essentially those that are most specific. So these range from very general statements to very specific ones, such as the directional expression of a building, or the idea that a building is a product of its own time, and so additions maybe to what extent do they try to impersonate that product. These are all in the code if anyone's interested, but we wanted to give you that framework. I should also say here along the way, there's a letter we received today that I apologize was supposed to be here at the dais for you. It's short, and I'll probably read it aloud we don't usually read those aloud, but I'll probably read it aloud at the end, given the circumstances. So, with that said, process, great, hopefully simple enough to understand, and then this request, perhaps simple enough to understand. There are 3 landmark, so 136 Green Bay Road is an estate. There are 3 pieces of it that are subject to landmark protection. One is the manor house, which is the principal structure located on one lot. This is what most people think of when they think of the Stonebridge estate. There's also the carriage house, or occasionally called the coach house, which was, it's a structure on lot 2 of the subdevelopment. And then there are some landscape features. You can look, there's a map of what is and isn't protected in your packet, but 2 that would be removed as part of this application as it stands today. One would be this terrace element. There are a few more photos in the packet, but there's a terrace at the, you can actually see it there very well along the back side, the raised lawn, terraces, these spouts, stairs, things like that. Those would all be removed and graded to drain. And then there's also this retaining wall near the south side of the property that would be removed as well. So 3 different protected features. Both of these structures would be destroyed as proposed. And then some, but not all, of these landscape elements would be demolished. So landscape elements we believe would remain include the there's, of course, very iconic gates, there's a bridge, there's a pond, there's all that area to the front of the house isn't proposed to change. There are some benches and things of that nature that are shown on the plans as staying. But essentially this would be an empty lot.
So to simplify, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I read through the 4 phases of submittal documentation for demolition, the petitioner is looking to demolish the manor house and the carriage house, and the pad or structures around each of those buildings, and is essentially silent on landscape and other features that are protected under the historic preservation ordinance that was adopted. So one of the things we would do, obviously, in a advisory conference is better understand the full breadth and depth of the request, the demolition request, what would be included and what would not be included as part of their proposal. Any questions from the commissioners before we take comments from the audience? Okay. Audience comments? Anyone who would like to? Yeah, if you could introduce yourself and thank you for coming.
My name is Matt Allison. I live at 412 West Witchwood, which is on the northern border there. Yeah, just right about in the middle of the street.
Okay.
If I can clarify real quick what you were just talking about, were you saying you were discussing the limits of your power as far as what this board has? And is that, and the limits of your power are only to delay demolition,
That's
not in any way stop it?
That's correct, and
So
that is all, those are also limitations on the village board, so there, it is.
So in other words, this is going to be destroyed no matter what?
Uh,
There is,
go ahead.
yeah, so there is one asterisk on that. So ordinarily, let's say this is any other property in the village. This board's power is limited to delay. This board doesn't issue demolition permits. They are required as a matter of law to be issued. So this board can't stop it. The village board would be very limited in stopping it. I'm not an attorney, but that's how it works. In this particular case, as you're aware, as a neighbor, there is a planned development that encompasses this entire site. And part of that planned development, which is a package essentially of zoning changes, is that this house, these structures have to remain.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, yep.
And so in this case, it would take some action by the village board before a demolition permit would be issued, separate from this group's review.
Right,
So-
but were you not saying, however, that the village board, I thought you said that the village board cannot prevent demolition?
Ordinarily, yes. In this particular case, you know, the developer
Since the
voluntarily
zoning
consented.
is
Yeah.
preconditioned upon them not demolishing the manor house, correct?
They
Yeah.
sought approval for a plan of development. They agreed that they would follow
Yeah.
the plan. They consented to that, and so that's a special circumstance in this case.
Gotcha. I mean, the list of misdeeds that have gone on with this development is really long to list. But as far as you folks are concerned, obviously, tearing down the manor house is not conducive to preserving things in Lake Bluff. It's, you know, Lake Bluff here, when you have a building like that, that size with that sort of history, a lot of them are hidden behind gates and trees, and folks aren't even able to see it at all. No one, you know, even knows that this type of thing actually exists in Lake Bluff. It'd be nice to keep it for that one, that's just one reason, you know, there's so many. But the other problem is that you know, everything that's going on with this has been built upon certain things happening, so this happens and then that happens. And the problem is that this has not been done in good faith by the Roanoke Group that purchased this. They haven't operated in good faith. And I believe their position is completely invalid. I don't believe they should even own this property anymore. And truthfully, in the interest of transparency, when it comes to us, the people that live near there, we're gonna be doing every single thing possible for them to relinquish their ownership of the property, which means we're not gonna personally allow anything to happen to it, at least by them. So that's all I have to say about it right now. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Katie Sakara. I also live at 412 West Witchwood. I actually have a couple questions. We recently learned that the Manor House, in spite of the request being put into demo, was assessed by another group in Deerfield and was given the rating of good, which was the second highest rating. the highest being excellent. I don't know, I'm just trying to get my head around the entire process and how that plays into it. It was obviously evaluated for a purpose, but I don't know where that fits into the scheme of things. It seems to me that if the building was assessed to be in good condition, that the demo of that would seem like a kind of off-suited request. I certainly would imagine that renovation of a building of this size wouldn't be an easy renovation by any means. But it's very disheartening for us to hear that this building would be torn down, given the history that it has in the community. You know, we moved here 3.5 years ago. We moved back to the community. I lived here a long time ago, but we searched for houses in the community, surrounding communities, for probably 1.5 years. We looked at tons of houses throughout the North Shore, way too many, but we ended up landing on Lake Bluff, and it was really for 2 reasons. First, it's such a great community. It's such a family-oriented community. But second, the biggest differentiating factor for us about Lake Bluff is its ties to all of these historic landmarks and all of the history that Lake Bluff has. Other suburbs don't have that. I mean, a couple might, but not to the degree that Lake Bluff does. So that was a huge driver, and my concern with Roanoke, since we've moved in, you know, we get up every morning and look across the street and we just see nothing. We see disrepair, houses that are boarded up, there's garbage, the fence falls down, the landscaping maybe gets mowed twice a year. And, you know, if they're not maintaining those aspects of it, I don't know how that speaks to, you know, their thoughts and their care for the community. And I don't know that that fits into, you know, I don't know that that's something that's going to change anybody's mind. But to me, all of these other suburbs that we looked at had all these subdivisions of cookie cutter subdivision after cookie cutter subdivision with strip malls and nondescript housing developments. To me, the big difference when we moved in was this house, this beautiful manor home, you know, designed by Howard Van Doren Shaw, and the idea that someone wanted to preserve that history and build this beautiful community around it would be such a draw and such a benefit that you just would not find in other communities. You won't, and once it's gone, it's gone. And, you know, one of my biggest concerns in seeing their lack of maintenance with the estate is that I think about this way too much late at night, but I worry that they would tear it down and then they'll just go bankrupt and walk away. I mean, they really haven't given us any reason to think that they would do anything else beyond that. And then we'll be left with this huge plot of land, and what our option will be to subdivide it and make it into a cookie cutter subdivision like we have all around us. And I don't know how I can impact change. It sounds like everything kind of goes down a very specific path as far as how the village handles things and where, you know, you guys fit in with everything. So I think we're kind of looking as community members how we can help. You know, what can we do to save some of this history and these beautiful buildings that could really be repurposed and brought into the future, and so that future generations could enjoy them versus just having another subdivision.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of us that were part of the process of landmarking the structure and being part of the discussion around the planned residential development that resulted, one of the big attractions, not saying anything about the value of the PRD as it currently exists, but one of the big attractions to those of us on this commission was the fact that the Manor House and the Carriage House would be restored, as well as the 10 acres on the east side. So yeah, this is changing the dynamic, and I think as a resident, the best thing to do is attend these meetings. There'll be a lot of them.
Yeah.
We'll have one next month. The village board will certainly have discussions around it. If and when a proposed change to the PRD or a change to the zoning or the usage, that'll go before the Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals, so there'll be lots of opportunity for public comment. This is just the first step in what's going to be a very long process, I think.
Right. And is it, typically it goes in the order like we're seeing right now, where they'll put in the request for the demo, but they're not providing plans on what the future state would be?
It is more typical, although this is a very large parcel, but for smaller parcels, it's more typical that we have a demolition request along with, or quickly following, a sense of what is going to be replacing it. It is something we will, assuming we have an advisory review, is something we'll talk about. Again, that's not our purview,
Right.
but it is something that helps us put this whole idea in context. In large degree, as the commission of first impression, since we're going to be getting this information in a public forum for the first time before any other group, it's up to us to get as much information from the petitioners as we can, so that other boards and so the village are informed as to what the plans are and what the process is all about.
Gotcha. And ultimately, you may have covered this previously, but just, it's a lot of information to take in. Does the ultimate decision, is that made with the village? Is that with the demo or no demo? Is that who holds where the decision is made?
Well, the decision ultimately is the village board. The issuance of a demolition permit is an administrative function.
Okay,
But as Glenn indicated, the fact that there is a planned residential development that has the landmarking of these structures integral to it, integrated into the PRD itself, means that it's more complex than simply issuing a building permit. So the village board and staff, I know, will be spending a lot of time thinking through not only what happens now, but what is going to happen in the future.
sure. And just one other question.
Yeah.
I believe the company's name that owns it is Roanoke. Do they have any other that we know of? Do they own anything else in Lake Bluff, or are they anywhere else in the area, or is this their primary
I'll let you deal with
property?
it. Actually, I think that's probably a question we should ask at the advisory conference.
Sounds good.
So, to offer a few extra responses to your questions, Roanoke, they have local offices here in Lake Bluff, so they own an office.
Right.
They were involved in the Archdiocese development in Libertyville, which that was, I believe, turned down by the village of Libertyville, and there's another saga there that has been covered in the newspapers. I don't feel comfortable trying to summarize it.
Sure.
Those are the only ones I'm aware of here in Illinois. They also have, I believe they're based out of California, and they do some development work in California as well.
Okay.
To one of your first questions about that condition rating, I think we're looking at the same condition rating. So from time to time, the village has requested, or Roanoke has performed evaluations of the structure. And so the one I'm familiar with, I believe it's about a year to 18 months ago, had a similar conclusion that the structure was in good structural condition. You know, the idea behind those evaluations was to make sure that, you know, the timbers weren't rotting out, the roof wasn't caving in, that, you know, the developer was doing their job in maintaining the structure as they would need to consummate the development. And so I believe that's where that discussion has come from.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
again, as far as we know, this is in fine structural shape.
Right.
Not a risk to anybody.
Right.
There's, in other communities, there are different processes. So this delay mechanism is one of a few different flavors that's in northeastern Illinois. So in other communities, there are perhaps more selective, or have taken a different balancing act. But in other communities, one of the criteria you would look at would be you would ask a developer to show, or a person to show, economic hardship to be allowed to tear down a structure. And so when you get into those types of conversations, you get into the condition of the building and how much money it would cost to put it to an adaptive reuse. Could you ever profit from it? If you can't, is it really fair to say you can't tear it down? And so on. We understand that Roanoke has independently completed some of that analysis and may bring it in the future.
Mhm.
We don't have possession of that report today.
Gotcha.
On a personal note, a little unrelated, but since we're talking about cookie cutter subdivisions, before the meeting started, I was talking about my native homelands in California. I think this is to the same scale,
Oh
but
my
this
gosh.
this was my world growing up, so
Yeah.
I'm sympathetic to your
Right.
your
Right.
desires.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
Which was your house?
Different.
number one, number two.
Okay.
This is my great-grandfather's house, so mine is,
Is that a pool in the backyard?
I think so, yes.
Hmm, right next to the stable.
Yeah, that's right.
His house is somewhere right along the street.
Anything else?
I actually want, just one other question. The front area between the Manor House and Green Bay Road,
Yeah.
is that considered a preservation area that cannot be touched, or can that also be subdivided into more?
The way that the historic preservation ordinance governing this property is written is that area is preserved. It is intended to be open space. Part of the requirement of the owner, of all the owners of that particular property, were to maintain that as open space and to clear, and they've done some work in clearing and maintaining it. So that, the intent is that it remains open.
Okay, it's interesting that the preservation of the land versus the preservation or the landmark status of the building are kind of perceived as separate. The landmark status seems like it's,
The landmark status, the ordinance allows us to landmark property, and that's what we did in this case.
okay,
So the landmark ordinance includes the open space to the east, includes the bridge, includes the pond, and includes a couple of other specific structures within that open space. So it is all included in the ordinance itself.
but the building has just separate concessions. Where someone, that's how they were able to, because wasn't the building originally landmarked, or no?
No,
Oh,
the
it wasn't.
landmark, the original, I might be wrong, but my recollection is that the landmark ordinance for the first time included the property and the manor house and the carriage house as
Okay.
one designation. It's included in one, it's not separate.
Got it, okay.
And to add a bit more detail, so there are multiple tools in use on this property, the same as anywhere. So there's a landmark ordinance, there's the planned development approvals. In this particular case, another tool that applies just to these eastern 10 acres is in the state of Illinois, a conservation easement, or in other states as well. So if you're a private property owner, let's say, actually Crabtree Farm uses the same tool, it's a good example. You can grant an easement essentially in perpetuity to say that you'll preserve this land, it won't be developed, so on and so on. You'll grant it to a third party. You can take a tax write-off for it when you do that. And in Illinois, there's special rules around, that limit your ability to get rid of that and even provide for adjacent owners to be able to enforce that. If a nonprofit one, things like that. I'm not an attorney, but that particular tool is in use here and is sort of a whole separate consideration aside from what this board administers
Gotcha.
and from the village's other recourses.
Okay,
So.
that's helpful.
If I can add a comment that the land that's preserved is, and the reason why the road is named Jensen Drive is that the landscaping was done by Jens Jensen. So the shape and style of the road itself, the placement and shape of the pond and the bridge and the Ragdale Ring that is there are all part of Jensen's landscape design. And that was part of our consideration when we originally landmarked this property, so that there's Howard Van Doren Shaw work, and there's also Jens Jensen work on the property. And so that nice curvy driveway that you see, that's a signature part of Jens Jensen's work. You can see the same thing at Tangley Oaks. If you drive into Tangley Oaks, you have the same curvy driveway going across a pond. It's one of his signature marks. And so that's why that was landmarked and why that space is supposed to remain open.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Anyone else? Okay.
I would, if you would. Again, apologize that this letter was not distributed to you. It was sent to us a little bit after noon today.
Okay.
But I'd like to read it quickly. It's pretty brief. So this is from Mr. Ted Kovas, I believe, who he is a resident of 1600 Green Bay Road. I believe it's this property here, although I'm not positive. So writing to the commission, he says, "Dear commission members, my wife and I live at 1600 Green Bay Road in Lake Bluff. Our western property boundary abuts Stonebridge Estate at 136 Green Bay Road. We are writing to express our strong opposition to the proposed development of the main home and coach house. When this development first passed in 2005, it was very contentious with a slew of 4-3 votes over the objection of many in the community. As part of the eventual passage, the manor home, coach house, and landscape were to be protected. In 2005, the Village of Lake Bluff designated the manor home, the coach house, and the landscape historic. Roanoke Group bought the property with the full understanding that the manor home, coach house, and landscape were designated historic and not able to be demolished. It is my belief that they were also to maintain the above three. Now, 8 years later, the Roanoke Group claims the manor house and coach house are deteriorated, unusable, and need to be torn down. This is ridiculous. Roanoke valued and bought the property with the understanding it was restricted and was supposed to maintain the landscape and buildings. Rewarding them for not maintaining the buildings and allowing them to change the historic designation now would set a very bad precedent in the village for all the other owners of historic properties. My wife and I own one of 3 houses built on the original William B. Kelly estate. We have gone to great lengths and expense to preserve our historic home and landscape. It is my belief our neighbor at 1650 has done the same. It would be tragic to reward Roanoke for their ill behavior. The history of this development has been pretty checkered. That said, at some point, the village has to say enough is enough and hold on to its integrity as a village and trustee of our most historic properties. Please feel free to call me with any questions. Sincerely, Ted Kovas.
Thank you for entering that into the record. Any other,
Can you point out where 1600, do you know where 1600 is on your,
I think it's in the back because the one in the front is the Litzinger property.
yeah,
That's not what we're looking for.
I'm trying to figure out whether there's another house on that property.
I think it's
There you
maybe
go.
down the other side road, next to
Oh,
the.
so
Big road.
take a look at your map, folks, the map that was in your packet.
Yeah,
1600 is right there.
okay, that's right on the road.
Yep.
That's the
It's on the
big,
south side of the
it's the-
railroad tracks.
It's the big Spanish colonial.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
Big stone fencing.
I didn't realize that was part of the original
There is some
estate.
here.
Any questions of Glenn? If not, I would entertain a motion that would determine that the proposed work is inconsistent with the goals and purposes of the Historic Preservation Chapter of the Municipal Code, and that we would request the applicant to be present at an advisory review conference in January at a date to be determined, hopefully later today. So I would entertain a motion.
I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any additional discussion? And let's do a roll call vote on that, please.
Certainly. Member Bergman,
Yes.
Member George,
Yes.
Member Nickel,
Yes.
Member Richardson,
Yes.
Chair Kraus.
Yes.
Motion carries.
So we'll be having an advisory review conference, probably well, we'll get a date. It looks like it'll be the 3rd week or so of January based on everybody's schedules. And we want to do that so that we get more information, so that there's more information available to residents. I expect we'll have a full house for that meeting, which we welcome. At that meeting, we will summarize the process again, summarize what we know of the application, ask the applicant to present, if they wish, which I assume they will, their rationale for this activity. The commissioners will have an opportunity to ask questions of the petitioner, and then we'll open the floor up for the questions and comments from village residents and other attendees. That's very noisy.
Perhaps I should have asked this before. Is there any way we could go see the property?
Go see the property? I'm sure that Glenn can arrange that.
Yes, we can
Yeah,
certainly try to
I haven't
arrange
been out
that.
there in ages.
Me either.
Can we find a nice cold windy day today?
Yes, we picked the most lovely weather to go on field
We
trips.
should probably do it in groups of two, just so we don't have a public meeting that we're involved with. But I would imagine that that would be something we could do.
We'll try to arrange that. It would probably be relatively close to the time of your advisory review conference, but we'll be in touch on scheduling.
Okay, anything else on this matter? Okay, thank you for the comments from the audience. Let's move, Commissioner's report, let's move to the question of what day in January we're going to meet.
So I'll put the board up here. I should mention, the village attorney will be joining us for this particular meeting. As happens from time to time, he has let us know that this Wednesday, the 29th, would have a conflict with one of the other municipalities he represents. We can have substitute counsel, but ideally we'd like to put it when he can be present. The 22nd certainly would be convenient. There are some additional dates here that were added recently, so didn't know if any
Of course, the
of these-
attorney can't make the date all of us can make.
Of course.
Paul, what's your schedule like?
I'm trying to look
So
at
we're
my-
starting with Monday, the 20th.
Monday, the 20th.
If y'all want to look as well, we can go in columns.
Yeah, the 22nd would work,
Okay.
and I would think that the, let me take a peek here. I think the 30th works also.
So no to the 20th, no to the 21st, no to the 29th.
Yeah.
Janie?
Janie responded.
The 21st is a conflict with the library board.
Okay.
But the others I could do.
Technical difficulties. Happens to the best of us.
Okay, so it's only that one date that you couldn't? Okay, cool.
So the 22nd and the 30th, right, Paul?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm keeping track for my own sake as well. And then there are some new dates. Louis, can you do any of these extra ones?
I'm gone that whole week.
Okay, how about the 30th?
I can always phone in on the 20th.
It depends the circumstances you're out of
22nd.
town for, so you can't phone in for anything.
I can't phone in for anything.
Can't phone in for anything. It would have to be employment purposes,
Oh, really?
a family emergency, or
Skiing.
there's a third. Skiing not work, unfortunately.
Don't break your leg on purpose.
I didn't realize there was restrictions on,
State law puts restrictions on it.
Really?
So you can't do the 30th?
Oh.
You're always welcome to watch. You're always welcome to send in written comments if you can't be here, but it has to be for one of a few reasons.
Janie can do the 30th, right?
Yes,
Okay.
I can do the 30th.
Sherry?
Yep,
and I can do the 20th also.
All right.
So it looks like the 30th is what we're doing.
20th would be not the best for me, but the 30th is fine. Every other day is fine.
All right. So Janie, you said you're into the 30th.
So it looks like the 30th, we got at least all of us that are here that can do it. And I'd like to have all of us here. It's gonna be I think we need all of our brain power. So let's say it's the 30th. All right. And,
Tentatively, we'll confirm with everybody involved that'll work. And I will, I'll let you
and,
know if that changes.
and this will be a special meeting. We had intended to not have a meeting in January, so we'll, unless there's some other, I won't be back on the 8th, which is our regular meeting. So the 30th is the day. All right. Everybody get that down on your calendar, 30th, 7 o'clock,
So we will not have one on the 8th, correct?
unless there is some specific petition or reason. But we won't know
At
that.
this point, we're not expecting
Yeah.
anything, so
Okay.
It's likely that we'll not have that.
at some point in these first couple months of 2020, we're expecting a landmark application. I expect that will be later in that period of time.
Okay, great. Anything else from the commissioners?
I can move to adjourn.
Well, we still have staff.
Yes, very important staff report.
Sorry.
I have a very thick dissertation here of staff report, not really. As a reminder, end of the year, we're going into next year, which means that, as always, your meetings are scheduled for the second Wednesday of the month, every month. We will issue a notice on behalf of the commission announcing that shortly in January. Aside from that, have a happy holiday.
Thank you, and you as well.
And let's see if we can book Susan Benjamin for February, a regular meeting in February to go over we need to get that done. So let's do that in February. Okay. All right, we look forward. I was a little surprised, Glenn, saying that you didn't send us very much material. So I'm looking forward to the material. And everybody, there is a
Really
nice
good.
map.
Yes,
really
thank you for
nice
the map.
yeah.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
That was very helpful.
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Adjourn. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.